Go.
Hello everybody, welcome to another Topical Talkology talk with me and Theo.
Good afternoon, how are you?
Good afternoon. So interesting week this week because it's been the whole Brexit thing and the deal that Theresa May has made, and she's had the support from her cabinet, but the other Tories seem to be in revolt against her, and whether she should step down. Look, I don't think she's going to last a full term here. I think she's been actually quite an appalling Prime Minister as a whole. And I think in some ways you needed someone who had a larger pair of balls in some ways, who could actually negotiate a lot harder with Europe, and they weren't buying that because we had a lot more leverage than people actually realised we did. Do you want to get us started on that one, Theo?
Okay.
Do you reckon?
Well,
do you not think so?
No, I was listening to what you said. The key thing is that it's all about money. The main reason why they don't want UK to leave is because it's like a stool with three legs. It's the banks. So you have the French, you have the German, and you have the British banks. And in fact, of course, London, specifically the City of London, which is actually distinct from Greater London, has its own laws, its own jurisdiction, its own mayor. In fact, it's called the Lord Mayor of London, is the main financial centre of Europe still.
Actually, just before you go into the whole spiel into finance, which is likely to totally excite me or bore the hell out of me, is why is the City of London different in that respect? Do you know the reason behind that? Do you have all the livery companies in the City of London?
Yeah. Well, it's because centuries ago, one of the invaders, I'm not sure which invader it was. I think it may be William the Conqueror, but I think it's probably a bit too early. But essentially, they couldn't conquer the original Londinium, which was the Roman fortress of London, and therefore to appease the inhabitants, they allowed it like a mini state, to be like a Vatican almost. So it was, although of course nowadays the walls have been eroded and you can't really see it, but it still has its own traditions, its own way of governing itself.
It's got its own police force.
Its own police force, its own mayor.
Yeah. So hold on a second. So the Mayor of London has got no jurisdiction in the City of London. Is that correct?
No, because that's the Lord Mayor of London, and to become Lord Mayor, you have to go through a multi-step process of being an alderman, or was it a marshal or something like that? I can't remember, but you have to go through many different steps, and to become a marshal, you have to be an alderman first.
But it's only a year's position, though.
Is it?
The Lord Mayor shows every year.
Okay.
So you get a new mayor every year, or a new Lord Mayor of London every year, because that's why they have the Lord Mayor's Parade, which is, I think it was actually last weekend, actually.
Well, I'm not sure the point.
Weekend just gone. There was a Lord Mayor's show.
How can anyone do anything useful in a year?
I think it's more of a symbolic position than it is a active one, to be honest.
That's true. The Mayor of London has a lot more power than the Lord Mayor. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think it's more of a.
Technically, the Queen can't enter the City of London without permission from the Lord Mayor of London. Although I think that's just traditional, where he gives her the key. And if they're key to the city, and if they're in a hurry, he can actually do it whilst they're in Westminster Cathedral or something like that. But anyway, the key thing is that there's so much financial problems in Europe, specifically Spain, Portugal, Greece, Italy, that they need, i.e. the French and the Germans need the UK banks. To give you another example, how teetering on the brink they've been. Not a lot of people know, but Ireland used to be very tax friendly, and it would be taxed locally. So what happened is a lot of French and German banks invested heavily in derivatives and did all sorts of things in Irish banks. So when the credit crunch came, there were these enormous losses that these French and German banks made, and Europe told the Irish government that they had to bail out their own banks. They didn't help them at all.
Okay.
Which brought the Irish economy to its knees, and that's why Ireland was crashing months before England, the rest of England, got a sniff of anything themselves. Now, I think there's been some kind of shenanigans between Ireland and Europe in terms of agreeing on various terms for easing the burden.
A bit above our pay grade on that one, is it?
Well, that's right. And I suspect that's why Ireland now is being used as a pawn, because it really is unbelievably important in terms of the finances of German and French banks.
But I mean, the thing is, if we have all this leverage, how come Theresa May got such a bad deal? I mean, because I don't think she went and did the negotiating herself.
Well, they're doing it on purpose, because if you look at the deal, in fact, the deal is nothing. The dealers are basically saying, you're still a member of Europe, you have to do what we say, but the difference is you don't pay us anything, but you have no say. But you still have to do what we say. That's it. That's the deal.
But they don't actually. Well, but the whole issue around why we came out, or why people voted to come out, was predominantly to do with the whole immigration situation.
And in 2020, that apparently, unless they do make a different agreement, is going to end. So therefore, there will be no free travel after 2020, but they've guaranteed the...
What do you mean free travel? So you have to pay like for visas and things like that?
That's right. But those living already in the respective countries will be allowed to stay.
Okay.
But the other thing to bear in mind, of course, is that there's all these things that have been developed, and they're all unnecessary. So, for instance, Italy was let into the EU, and they knew that it couldn't manage it financially, and indeed now they are refusing to follow the leader of the European banks, because they can't have a financial policy that is strict enough, otherwise the government won't get elected. So they're just about to be sanctioned, or shall we say punished, by the European Parliament. And then because they let Italy in, they couldn't not let Greece in. And so Greece was let in, and essentially these two countries are now being destroyed. But here is the rub, that where you have bad debts held by governments, but held by banks, the government can step in and say, we're going to cover that debt. And then it becomes an accounting exercise where they put it on their books, and it relieves the banks to then be able to get on with the jobs of lending. But here's the other thing of the difference in banking systems. In the UK, and I guess to some extent America, but I'm not sure, you have enormous conglomerates. So you have just a few big names, and if there's any small banks rising up the ranks, they get bought out. And banks are there for profit, and the best way of making profit is to play with investments, not actually to use money responsibly to lend out to individuals for business.
We should really have an investment banker here to actually be on this.
I think for most purposes,
and I know plenty actually.
Indeed, so. Now, what happens in Germany is completely different. In Germany, you have a lot more small high street banks that are not for profit. And those banks, because they're not for profit, they're there to do good for the community. And what they do is they simply lend money responsibly to individuals to build businesses. Now, if on the other hand, you lend money for people just to make investments which can fail, or you lend money to buy houses, or you lend money to buy goods on credit, what's happening is you're simply increasing the money supply for a limited asset, and therefore the price of the asset will go up according to supply and demand, and then it becomes a Ponzi scheme. So what happened in 2008 to 2010 with the credit crunch is you had the big crisis, and what they did is they did two things. One is they changed the accounting laws, so they changed it from market to market to something else. So market to market is what can you get for that property right now. So for instance, if there's a tidal wave coming and you have a beachfront property which you paid £500,000 for, and the bank comes to you and says, actually there's a tidal wave coming and your property's probably worthless, so we need you to pay off your loan immediately. They'll say, well, I haven't got it. And they'll say, well, let's see who can buy it. And there's no one. Well, there's a fireman over there. So they go to the fireman and say, will you buy this property? And he'll say, big tidal wave coming, I'll give you 10 grand for it. So they'll turn around to the owner and say, right, your property's worth £10,000. You owe us £490,000. That was the cause of the credit crunch, when people panicked and prices dropped. So what they did...
But that's all. The thing is, you see, it's not always about actual value. It's about perceptive.
Exactly.
It's perception.
Before that,
perception. The market responds on.
And what they did, it started in the States, is they changed the law. They removed market to market, and of course, market to market was actually taken out after the Great Recession of the 30s. Because in the past, that's how accounts used to be done. So if you go to the 19th century, there were quite wild swings in the stock market because of market-to-market accounting. So if there's a war or anything like that, the prices would drop like a bomb, and then everyone would lose their shirts. So they brought it back. I don't know when they brought it back, but it was quite recently, and then they got rid of it again because it was such a disaster. Now the other thing they did is they kept interest rates incredibly low whilst doing quantitative easing. So what you now have is you have a change in valuation of your asset, you have increase in supply money, you have decrease in cost interest rates for the same asset. And that's why it's been shooting up. So if you pay an interest only at 1%, the asset goes up 14%. It's a no-brainer, isn't it?
Yeah.
Until you realise there's no value to that asset.
So you should have been an investment banker in your former life.
Well, no, it's all a Ponzi scheme. So Ponzi schemes are illegal. Well, that's why we get inflation, because of increased money supply and irresponsible lending.
Of course. So let's change the subject before we've put our riveting audience, our audience to sleep on this one.
Democracy, people are saying that people were not told enough about Brexit and explained and so on. The fact is that, first of all, I was listening to a lecture, and the lecturer was saying we're given too much information, and it's not within the interests of the media to make something non-political. So there may be many things that people on the left and the right would both agree on, because it's not really political, it's just a common sense issue. But the media will manipulate it.
Yeah, but the thing is, common sense isn't always common practice, is it?
Well, you're quite right.
Yeah.
But there are some, like killing somebody, it's not a political thing, is it? But it's just wrong. But the media will try and make it political. They might say this is racism or some stuff like that, when it clearly isn't. Now, the other thing to understand about how democracy doesn't work also is we're given a certain number of people to vote for. But the people with the real power nominate those who we vote for. And in fact, there was one famous politician who is renowned for saying, I don't care who does the voting as long as I get to nominate. And this is the farce of it. And you and I know that it's very easy to rise quickly in politics, because some will be placed strategically, for instance, in a seat where people need to be seen politically correct.
There's several variables, and I've worked with this before, actually, and it is about how marketable you really are. Look, the thing is, whoever you put in that role has got to have a level of aptitude. They've got to have a level of appearance that is appealing to the public. They've got to have a level of likability. They've got to have a level of being able to communicate the message effectively.
But they have to be well placed in that area. So someone who's marketable,
particularly more so in the Tory party, because there's always a level of that nepotism.
Yeah.
And the thing is, do you know what? If you actually know that's what the game is, and then you actually understand the game, and then you can actually work around it. And someone used the word with me was box clever. Have you heard that before? I never heard it before, actually. And you got to be box clever, and it's like when you're in a boxing ring and you're taking the punches, and and you've got to deal with you got to deal with the fact that the endurance you've got to actually have in that boxing ring, how you're going to avoid those punches, or all those little things that you've got to become a clever boxer in some ways. If the other person's bigger and stronger than you, you've got to attempt a different approach. So even if you look at Jeremy Corbyn when he first came in to how he is now, he's actually become, and I'll give it to him, he's become a more charismatic speaker. He's they've improved his appearance. He's no longer wearing those brown, although I haven't seen him recently. He's no longer wearing those brown. They put in a blue suit, which is, if you actually know anything about colour psychology, is about which that instigates trust. to the public. He